There is a particular kind of horror that comes not from monsters, but from teenagers who, in the hours between one ordinary moment and the next, commit acts that adults twice their age could not bring themselves to imagine. Some of these killers planned for weeks, some acted in seconds, some showed remorse, some showed nothing at all, but every single one of them was a teenager, and every single one of them is now in prison for murder. These are their stories, and more importantly, these are the stories of the people they took. She wrote it all down. The victim's name, the location, the time, the code word, even who would stab where. It was all there, in a teenager's handwriting, tucked inside a notebook in a bedroom her parents shared in the same house. This wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't a dark poem. This was a murder plan. And every single step of it was carried out exactly as written. This is the story of Brianna Ghey and the two classmates who planned her death like a school project. Brianna Ghey was 16 years old, a Year 11 pupil at Birchwood Community High School in Warrington, England. By all accounts, she was vibrant, social, and full of personality. Born on the 7th of November 2006, Brianna was a transgender girl who had found her footing in life and wasn't afraid to live it loudly. On the 11th of February 2023, she received a message from a friend asking her to come out and meet up that afternoon. She texted her mom to let her know she was heading out to see a friend. Her mother was glad. She thought her daughter would have a wonderful afternoon. Brianna would never come home. Scarlett Jenkinson had transferred to Birchwood Community High School after being permanently excluded from Culcheth High School, where she'd spiked a younger classmate's food with cannabidiol-infused edibles. It was at Birchwood where she met Brianna and formed what appeared on the surface to be a close friendship. But behind that friendship, Jenkinson was hiding something that nobody around her could have imagined. In the notebook she kept in her bedroom, a bedroom in a home shared with her parents, both teachers, and her 3 older brothers, Jenkinson had filled pages with detailed biographical notes on some of history's most notorious serial killers: Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Richard Ramirez. She documented their methods, their victim counts, their influences, and their quotes. She wasn't studying them out of academic curiosity. She admired them, and she had been texting Eddie Ratcliffe about all of it. Ratcliffe had known Jenkinson since they were 11 years old at Culcheth High School. To the outside world, he was a top-grade student, a role model, some said. He'd even competed internationally as an amateur kickboxer. But Ratcliffe had his own dark fascinations, particularly with knives. He collected blades, and weeks before the 11th of February, on a skiing trip to Bulgaria, he purchased a hunting knife. Together, Jenkinson and Ratcliffe had drawn up a kill list, 5 names of people they deemed worthy of murder for trivial, almost nonsensical reasons. Brianna Ghey was on it. And Jenkinson, who had grown obsessed with Brianna, had told a psychiatrist that she wanted to kill her so that Brianna would, in her words, always be with her. The plan Jenkinson wrote in her notebook was chillingly precise. Meet Eddie at the wooden posts at 1 p.m., walk to the library bus stop, wait for Brianna to get off the bus. The 3 of them walk to Culcheth Linear Park, go to the pipe and tunnel area. She says the code word to Eddie. He stabs Brianna in the back as she stabs her in the stomach. Eddie drags the body. They cover it with logs. To lure Brianna to the park, Jenkinson posed as a fake drug dealer on Snapchat, arranging a fake meeting and convincing Brianna that they were going to get drugs together. At 1:53 p.m., Brianna met Jenkinson and Ratcliffe at the bus stop. She had never met Ratcliffe before that afternoon. At 2:15 p.m., growing suspicious, Brianna messaged a friend. "Scarlett is so weird, girl. I think she's pretending to have a dealer." It was one of the last messages she ever sent. What happened inside Culcheth Linear Park was described in court as frenzied and ferocious. Brianna suffered 28 deep stab wounds to her head, neck, chest, and back, some striking bone, evidence of the force being used. She had defensive wounds on both arms, her wrist left gaping open. She had tried to fight back. The court confirmed she did not lose consciousness immediately. She knew what was happening to her. A woman walking her dog spotted the teenagers from a distance. By the time police were called, Brianna was already dead. Jenkinson and Ratcliffe were arrested the following day, during their trial at Manchester Crown Court, where they were referred to only as Girl X and Boy Y due to their ages. Both denied murder and blamed each other. The jury rejected every word. On the 20th of December 2023, both were convicted of murder. On the 2nd of February 2024, Mrs. Justice Amanda Yip sentenced them, Jenkinson received a minimum of 22 years. Ratcliffe, 20 years, both detained at His Majesty's pleasure. The case, however, did not end at sentencing. In December 2024, Ratcliffe's legal team took their fight to the Court of Appeal, arguing that Mrs. Justice Yip had failed to adequately account for his autism diagnosis and emotional immaturity when handing down his 20-year minimum term. Senior judges considered the submission and rejected it. The sentence, they ruled, was appropriate. Ratcliffe would serve every year of it. And while the courts closed their doors on the matter, Brianna's mother refused to close hers. Esther Ghey had sat through every day of that trial. She had heard the details no mother should ever have to hear. She had listened to forensic descriptions of what was done to her daughter, the same daughter who had texted her that afternoon to say she was going to have a wonderful time. In March 2025, Esther published a book titled Under a Pink Sky, a deeply personal account of Brianna's life, her transition, and the grief that followed her death. In it, Esther did not simply mourn. She also opened up about her own mental health struggles in the years since losing her daughter, writing with a vulnerability that resonated far beyond the true crime conversation surrounding the case. That same month, ITV aired a major documentary, Brianna, A Mother's Story, featuring interviews with Brianna's family and friends, giving a fuller, more human picture of the girl behind the headlines. But Esther Ghey did not stop at telling Brianna's story. As of April 2026, she remains one of the most prominent voices in the United Kingdom's ongoing debate around online safety and the regulation of mobile phones for children. She has met directly with government officials, pushing for the creation of what she calls child-safe phones, devices built by design to restrict social media access for minors. She believes that the digital world her daughter navigated played a role in the environment that allowed this tragedy to unfold, and she is determined to make sure other parents don't receive the kind of text message Brianna sent on that February afternoon, the one that said everything was fine, right before everything wasn't. In this case, there was no ambiguity. The plan was written down, the roles were assigned, the motive was documented in a teenager's own handwriting. We knew exactly who did what and why. But not every case comes with a notebook. Sometimes the only thing left behind is a question, and 66 years later, some questions are still waiting for an answer. We now turn to Case 2. Here is a question that has never been fully answered, and depending on who you ask, it never will be. Was Carol Ann Fugate a 14-year-old girl held hostage by a killer she was terrified of? Or was she his partner, willing, present, and complicit in 11 murders that terrorized the American heartland? Because here is the thing. The evidence points in both directions, and that is exactly what makes this case one of the most haunting in American criminal history. It begins, as so many tragedies do, with a love story that nobody around them approved of. Charles Raymond Starkweather was born on the 24th of November, 1938, in Lincoln, Nebraska. He was the third of 7 children in a working-class family, and from early childhood, life had been unkind to him. He had bowed legs, a speech impediment, nearsightedness so severe he couldn't read the top letter of an eye chart, a condition that went undiagnosed for years and left teachers labeling him a slow learner. His classmates bullied him relentlessly. The humiliation calcified into rage, and the rage never left him. He idolized James Dean, the brooding rebel, the misunderstood outsider, and spent his teenage years trying to inhabit that image while the world continued to treat him as a joke. Then he met Carol Ann Fugate, and for a while, nothing else seemed to matter. Caril was 13 years old when they were introduced through mutual connections. Charlie was 18, a high school dropout, working at a warehouse he'd chosen specifically because it was close to her junior high school. Her mother, Velda Bartlett, and her stepfather, Marion Bartlett, despised him. He was too old, too rough, too nothing. But Carol was in love, and love at 13 has a way of making every warning sound like noise. By late 1957, something inside Charles Starkweather had shifted into something irreversible. On the night of the 30th of November 1957, he walked into a Lincoln gas station and tried to buy a stuffed toy for Carol on credit. The attendant, Robert George Culvert, 21 years old, refused. Starkweather returned multiple times through the night, making small purchases, and then in the early hours of the 1st of December, he came back with a shotgun. He forced Culvert into his own car, drove him to a remote area, and shot him in the head. That was the first one. For nearly 2 months, nothing happened, and then everything happened at once. On the 21st of January 1958, Starkweather went to the Bartlett family home. Velda and Marion told him again to stay away from their daughter. He shot them both dead. Then he found Betty Jean Bartlett, Carol's 2-year-old half-sister, and clubbed her to death. The bodies were hidden in the outbuildings behind the house. Now here is where the question begins. Carol Ann Fugate later said that when she arrived home, Starkweather met her at the door and told her that her family was being held hostage, that if she didn't cooperate, they would be killed. She said she stayed with him out of fear, believing her family was still alive. But for 6 days, Carol greeted neighbors, turned away the milkman, and spoke to visiting relatives, all while her mother, stepfather, and baby sister lay dead outside. She put a handwritten note on the front door that read, "The family had the flu," and asked not to be disturbed. When family members grew suspicious and eventually called the police, Starkweather and Fugate had already fled. What followed was 8 days of murder across Nebraska and Wyoming. August Meyer, a 70-year-old farmer and longtime friend of the Starkweather family, shot dead alongside his dog. 2 teenagers, Robert Jensen and Carol King, who stopped on the road to help when Starkweather's car got stuck in the mud. Jensen was shot 6 times in the head. King was shot after a failed sexual assault. Starkweather later claimed Fugate pulled the trigger on King. Fugate denied it. Then came C. Lauer Ward, a prominent Lincoln businessman, his wife Clara Ward, and their maid Ludmila Fenkel, all stabbed or shot inside their own home. A traveling salesman named Merle Collison was shot dead in his car simply because Starkweather wanted to steal it. When they were finally stopped in Douglas, Wyoming, after a high-speed car chase exceeding 100 miles per hour, it was Fugate who ran to Natrona County Sheriff's Deputy William Romer, screaming that Starkweather was going to kill her. But when authorities searched the car, they found newspaper clippings, cut from the front pages, showing pictures of themselves and of Fugate's dead family. Fugate had claimed she didn't know her family was dead. Those clippings told a different story. At trial, the prosecution argued she had been a willing participant, that she had passed up multiple opportunities to escape, that she had stood guard, issued warnings, and played an active role. Starkweather himself, in one of the more twisted footnotes of the case, insisted she had committed several of the murders personally, while in another breath stating he didn't want her to face the death penalty. He said if he were to be executed, she should be too. The jury decided she was guilty. Carol Ann Fugate, at 14 years old, was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Robert Jensen and sentenced to life in prison. Charles Starkweather was executed in the electric chair at Nebraska State Penitentiary at 12 minutes past midnight on the 25th of June, 1959. He offered no last words, but in a letter written to his parents from death row, he had already said what he felt. "I'm not real sorry for what I did, 'cause for the first time, me and Carol had more fun." Fugate was paroled on the 20th of June, 1976, after serving 18 years. She rebuilt her life quietly, working as a janitorial assistant and later a nanny. She remarried, took a new name, Carol Ann Clare, and has maintained her innocence ever since. In 1996, the Nebraska Board of Pardons rejected her application for a full pardon. She applied again, and in February 2020, they rejected her once more. In 2023, a Showtime documentary titled 12th Victim made the case that Fugate was not Starkweather's accomplice, but his final and most overlooked victim. To this day, no one fully agrees on what Carol Ann Fugate was: a hostage, an accomplice, a traumatized child, a killer, a survivor who never got justice, or a woman who escaped the justice she deserved. The case never gave a clean answer, and perhaps that's the point. Some crimes don't resolve. Some questions just live on, open and unsettled, the same way Carol Ann Fugate has lived on, quietly, under a different name, carrying whatever she knows about those 8 days into a silence that has never once been broken. As we saw in this last case, the justice system had to decide what to do with a 14-year-old girl standing next to a killer, and it never fully agreed on an answer. But at least Carol Ann Fugate was 14. In the next case, the system would face a question it was even less prepared for. What do you do when the person standing in front of you, convicted of helping commit murder, is 12 years old? A law was passed in the state of Indiana because of this case. It changed how the entire state sentences juvenile offenders. It gave judges powers they didn't previously have. It reshaped the conversation around children and the criminal justice system. The law is named after one of the killers. His name is Paul Henry Gingerich. He was 12 years old. On the night of the 20th of April, 2010, Paul Gingerich and his 15-year-old friend Colt Lundy climbed through the window of Lundy's bedroom in the family's home in the Enchanted Hills neighborhood of Cromwell, Indiana. The house belonged to Colt's stepfather, Philip Danner, a 49-year-old machinist, husband, father, and member of the American Legion. Danner had guns stashed around the house, and the two boys helped themselves to two of them. Then they sat down and waited. The plan was straightforward in the way that only a plan made by teenagers can be. They wanted to get away, to run. They'd decided that Danner needed to die for that to happen, and so here they were, a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, sitting in the dark with stolen guns, talking themselves in and out of it. By their own account, they debated whether to go through with it right up until the moment the decision was made for them. Danner walked into the living room. He saw the two boys. He had just enough time to say, according to Lundy's own description in court records, "What the fu—" before each of them fired 2 shots into his body, 4 bullets. Danner died instantly. They grabbed his wallet, a handgun, some marijuana a friend had given them, and Danner's car. A third boy joined them, and the 3 drove west, aiming for somewhere that wasn't Indiana. They didn't make it far. A police officer pulled them over in Peru, Illinois, and whatever escape they had imagined ended there on the roadside. Both Gingerich and Lundy were charged as adults. Both pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Both were sentenced to 25 years in adult prison. Legal experts across Indiana were unable to point to a single prior case in which someone as young as 12 had been sentenced as an adult in the state. Paul Gingerich was, by all available accounts, the youngest person Indiana had ever sent to an adult prison. The Department of Corrections later revealed he was the size of an 8-year-old when he arrived. Child advocates and juvenile justice organizations were appalled. The case exposed a critical gap in Indiana law. The state was one of only 4 in the country that gave judges no discretion to impose blended juvenile-adult sentences. Representative Wendy McNamara of Evansville took up the cause and fought 2 legislative sessions before a compromise bill was signed into law in 2013. That legislation, House Enrolled Act 1108, known publicly as Paul's Law, gave Indiana judges the flexibility to craft sentences that accounted for the age and rehabilitative potential of young offenders. Crucially, it mandated a review hearing when a juvenile offender turned 18, at which point a judge could discharge them, move them to probation, or transfer them to adult prison. It was named after the boy who had helped shoot a man 4 times in his own living room. Indianapolis attorney Monica Foster took up Gingerich's case and appealed to the Indiana Supreme Court, which granted him a new sentencing hearing. At 15, Gingerich pleaded guilty again. This time, Whitley County Judge James Hoyer applied the new rules under Paul's Law, monitoring Gingerich's progress through the juvenile system, tracking his education, his behavior, and his rehabilitation. Gingerich earned an accelerated diploma with honors. He completed every program available to him. In March 2017, a few weeks after his 19th birthday, after nearly 7 years behind bars, Paul Henry Gingerich walked out of the Pendleton Juvenile Correctional Facility and moved in with his mother, Nicole, in Fort Wayne. He had a job at a manufacturing facility. He wore a GPS ankle monitor. He met regularly with Allen Superior Court Magistrate Samuel Kearns. He kept his head down, turned down national television interviews, and asked to be left alone to rebuild. His court supervision ended in February 2020, at which point he began a 10-year probation period. As of early 2026, the probation is still active and runs until approximately February 2030. Colt Lundy's path was different. He never pursued a resentencing under Paul's Law, but in late 2018, a judge granted him a sentence modification. He moved to a reentry center in January 2019, transitioned to home detention in March of that year, and by late 2021 had rebuilt enough of a life to step into public speaking and fitness. Natasha Hoffman, Philip Danner's daughter, had appeared at hearings and told judges clearly that she was not ready for Lundy's release. The justice system moved forward regardless. Philip Danner's family put it plainly in a letter read aloud in court during Gingerich's resentencing. He's guilty of murder, premeditated murder. Good grades and college credit do not make Paul innocent of this crime. And they weren't wrong. The crime was real. The planning was real. The 4 bullets were real. But so was the law that now carries his name, written because of what he did, and used to reshape what the system could do with him. Paul Gingerich did not escape consequence. He served nearly 7 years for a crime committed at 12 years old, and remains under the court's supervision to this day. But the most lasting thing he left behind wasn't a prison sentence, it was a law. In the third case of this video, there was only one question the entire country couldn't stop asking, and it had nothing to do with justice for the boys who did it. It had everything to do with the life they took. It starts with something every parent has experienced: a busy shop, a momentary distraction, a hand that slips from yours for just a few seconds. For Denise Fergus, those seconds lasted a lifetime. On the 12th of February 1993, Denise took her 2-year-old son, James Patrick Bulger, to the New Strand Shopping Centre in Bootle, Merseyside. It was an ordinary afternoon. James was a happy, bright-eyed toddler, big blue eyes, light brown hair, always smiling. Denise doted on him. When she stepped into A.R. Tim's butcher's shop that afternoon, she let go of his hand for just a moment to pay for her shopping. James was gone. What the shopping center's closed-circuit cameras had captured, though nobody knew it yet, was 2 10-year-old boys walking James Bulger out through the doors of the mall at 3:42 in the afternoon. One of them held the toddler's hand. They looked to passing shoppers like older brothers. Some people noticed the group. A few thought it was sweet. Nobody stopped them. Those 2 boys were Robert Thompson and John Venables, and they had not stumbled upon James by accident. Earlier that same afternoon, the CCTV footage showed them moving through the center, watching, waiting, selecting. They had already attempted to lead away another small child that day, a 2-year-old boy whose mother intervened just in time. James Bulger was their second attempt. While they circled, they shoplifted sweets, batteries, and a tin of blue Humbrol modeling paint. That paint would later become one of the most damning pieces of forensic evidence the case would produce. They walked James 2.5 miles. Along the way, he cried for his mother. He fell and cut his head near a canal, and they pulled his hood up to hide the injury as they passed people on the street. At least 38 individuals saw the trio during the journey. Some noticed the toddler's distress, the bruising already visible on his forehead. Nobody intervened. By the time they reached the railway line near Walton Lane, James Bulger had no one left to call for. His body was found on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, 1993. What had been done to him was so savage that police initially struggled to determine the full sequence of events. He had been struck with bricks, kicked with force, beaten with a heavy railway fish plate, a rusted iron bar. His legs had been stripped and injuries to the lower body had been inflicted while he was still alive. The pathologist spent 33 minutes in court outlining his wounds. Brain damage was extensive. The blue paint from the stolen tin was found on both boys' clothing. It was also found on James's body. The blood on Robert Thompson's shoe was matched through DNA to James Bulger. Thompson and Venables were arrested on the 18th of February 1993. Venables eventually broke down and confessed during questioning. Thompson refused to admit anything. Both were charged with abduction and murder. At their trial at Preston Crown Court, conducted as an adult trial with raised chairs so the boys could see over the dock designed for grown men, they were referred to only as Child A and Child B. On the 24th of November 1993, the jury took 6 hours to find them both guilty. Mr. Justice Moreland called it an act of unparalleled evil and barbarity. Robert Thompson and John Venables became the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. They were 10 years old. They served 8 years in secure youth custody and were released in June 2001 at 18, given new identities, and placed on lifelong license. Robert Thompson disappeared into anonymity. As of 2026, he has not reoffended and remains out of the public eye. John Venables did not stay quiet. In February 2010, he was recalled to prison after indecent images of children were found on his computer. He admitted the charges at Preston Crown Court and was sentenced to 30 months. He was released again in August 2013. In November 2017, he was recalled a second time, this time for possessing child abuse images and a pedophile manual. In December 2023, the parole board ruled that he still posed a danger to children, citing his long-term sexual interest in minors and his history of dishonesty with probation officers. Denise Fergus described the denial as the best thing that had happened to her in 30 years. In late 2025, Venables faced yet another mandatory parole review. In early March 2026, the parole board officially denied his release once again, ruling that he still poses a significant risk to the public and to children. He remains in custody. Denise Fergus has spent 33 years fighting. She runs the James Bulger Memorial Trust. In March 2025, on what would have been James's 35th birthday, she launched a victims helpline in his name. She has sat through every parole hearing. She has spoken to governments, to the media, to anyone who will listen. She has never stopped. James Patrick Bulger was born on the 16th of March, 1990. He was 2 years old when he was taken. He had big blue eyes and light brown hair, and he was, by every account, always smiling. He never made it to 3. In the 4th case, the image that defined everything was also on tape. Except this time, the killers put it there on purpose. They almost got away with it. And the only reason they didn't, the single piece of evidence that unraveled everything, was something they put there themselves. On the evening of the 22nd of September 2006, 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddard was house-sitting at the Whispering Cliffs Drive home of her aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, in Pocatello, Idaho. Cassie was a junior at Pocatello High School, popular, reliable, known for her good grades and her easy smile. Her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, had come over that evening. A little later, 2 classmates showed up to hang out. Brian Lee Draper and Tori Michael Adamczyk, both 16. The 4 of them watched a film. Draper and Adamczyk left around 9:30 in the evening, telling the others they were heading to a movie. Cassie and Matt were alone. 15 minutes later, the power went out. Beckham called his mother, who told him to come home. He phoned Adamczyk, who answered in a whisper and claimed to be at the cinema. Beckham left. Cassie was alone in a dark house. She was stabbed 29 times. Her body was discovered 2 days later when the Contreras family returned home. Her mother, Anna Stoddard, was plunged, in her own words, into a complete state of shock. Investigators arrived to find massive blood loss and deep lacerations consistent with multiple bladed weapons. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of robbery, but there were signs that Cassie had fought, that she had not gone without a fight. Police interviewed everyone who had been at the house that night. Beckham had been present when the power was tampered with and was named a person of interest. But he passed a polygraph test and had a firm alibi, and investigators moved on. When detectives turned to Draper and Adamczyk, both claimed they had gone straight to the movies after leaving Cassie's house. Neither could remember what the film was about. A theater employee who attended their school confirmed they had never shown up. They were lying. And now, investigators needed to know why. What came next is what makes this case so deeply unsettling, because Draper and Adamczyk had not simply committed a murder. They had documented it. In the days before the killing, they had filmed themselves in the school library, laughing, building what they called a death list of potential victims. They had recorded themselves in Draper's car discussing which horror films inspired them: the Scream franchise, the Columbine Massacre, the methods of Ted Bundy, the Hillside Strangler, and the Zodiac Killer. On that tape, Adamczyk looked into the camera and said, "Those people were mere amateurs compared to what we are going to be." Draper said, "We're going to make history." On the night of the murder, the recording captured Draper in the car at 9:50 p.m. saying, "The time is 9:50, September 22nd, 2006. Unfortunately, we have the grueling task of killing our 2 friends, and they are right in that house just down the street." After the attack, the same tape caught them in the car again, breathless, exhilarated, Draper saying, "We just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a joke." Then, barely a pause, "It's okay. We'll just buy movie tickets now." They had buried the tape, the masks, the weapons, and the clothing in an area near Black Rock Canyon, partially burning everything before covering it over. A friend named Lucero had purchased the knives for them. 4 blades, $40 from Draper, 5 from Adamczyk. The serrated knife, the one responsible for all fatal wounds, was claimed by Draper. When investigators confronted Draper, he eventually led them directly to the burial site. Everything was recovered. The partially burned VHS tape was restored by forensic experts. Every word, every laugh, every plan they had recorded was handed to the prosecution intact. Both were tried separately as adults. Draper was convicted of first-degree murder on the 17th of April, 2007. Adamczyk was convicted of both conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and first-degree murder on the 8th of June 2007. On the 21st of August 2007, both received life sentences without the possibility of parole for the murder charge, alongside an additional 30 years to life for conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Multiple appeals followed over the years. Adamczyk argued cruel and unusual punishment, ineffective counsel, and that his age had not been properly considered. The Idaho Supreme Court rejected every argument and upheld both convictions. As of 2026, both Tory Michael Adamczyk and Brian Lee Draper remain incarcerated at Idaho State Correctional Facilities. Neither has been released. Cassie's mother, Anna Stoddard, who spent years seeking justice for her daughter, died in 2022 from cancer, never seeing the men who killed her child walk free. In February 2026, Hulu released a 3-part docuseries titled The Scream Murder, a true teen horror story, revisiting the case and featuring interviews with those closest to it. Adamczyk and Draper both spoke in it. They are now 35 years old. Cassie Jo Stoddard was 16. She was house-sitting. She let 2 people she called friends through the front door. The tape they made to celebrate what they plan to do is the reason they will never see daylight again. The next case you will hear, the victim was also surrounded by people she thought were her friends, except that the attack didn't start as a murder. It started as a confrontation under a bridge. And what happened after she walked away is what made it one. She walked away. That is the part that makes this case almost impossible to process. After everything that was done to her under that bridge, Reena Virk got up and walked away. And then 2 of them followed her. Reena Virk was 14 years old, living in View Royal, a quiet middle-class suburb of Victoria, British Columbia. She was of South Asian heritage, the daughter of devout Jehovah's Witnesses Manjit and Suman Virk. She had struggled socially. She had spent time in a youth group home, and she was known to be on the fringes of the teenage social circle she desperately wanted to belong to. On the night of the 14th of November, 1997, she went to meet a group of teens near Shoreline Community Middle School. She thought they were her friends. What happened under the Craigflower Bridge that night began as a confrontation. One of the girls in the group accused Reena of stealing her address book and spreading gossip. The group turned on her. 6 teenagers swarmed Reena, kicking her, beating her, pressing a lit cigarette into her forehead as she screamed. And then, as quickly as it had started, they walked away. Reena Virk, battered and bleeding, somehow got to her feet and began to walk toward home. 2 of them did not walk away. Kelly Marie Ellard, 15 years old, and Warren Paul Glowatsky, 16, followed Reena along the shoreline. They caught up to her. They smashed her head against a tree, knocking her unconscious. Then they dragged her body to the gorge waterway and held her face underwater until she drowned. Reena's body was found 8 days later by police divers among the reeds of Portage Inlet. The pathologist's findings were devastating. Severe internal and external bruising, a swollen brain, a shoe imprint on her head consistent with stomping, and pebbles in her throat consistent with drowning face down in shallow water. The pathologist concluded that Reena's injuries were so severe that she likely would have died from them, even without the drowning. The 6 girls who carried out the initial attack, referred to collectively as the Shoreline 6, were tried in youth court and convicted of assault causing bodily harm. Their identities were protected. Ellard and Glowatsky, charged with murder and tried as adults, faced a far longer road. Glowatsky was convicted of second-degree murder in June 1999 and sentenced to life in prison. He accepted his guilt, participated in indigenous healing circles and restorative justice programs, discovered his Métis heritage, and eventually met Reena's parents face-to-face, where, amid tears, he apologized for what he had done. The Virks chose to forgive him. He was released on full parole in June 2010 and has not reoffended. Kelly Ellard's path was dramatically different. Her first trial in 2000 resulted in a conviction that was overturned by the Supreme Court of Canada on technical grounds. Her second trial in 2004 ended in a hung jury and a mistrial. Her third trial in 2005 produced another guilty verdict. The BC Court of Appeal overturned that too. It took until the 12th of June 2009, 12 years after Reena Virk was drowned in the Gorge waterway, for the Supreme Court of Canada to finally, in an 8-1 decision, reinstate the conviction and put the case to rest. Ellard received a life sentence for second-degree murder. In the years that followed, Ellard changed her name to Carrie Marie Sim. She was granted day parole in November 2017 after a protracted process in which board members repeatedly noted her minimization of the crime. She had 2 children while under community supervision, but her parole history became a cycle of violations and reinstatements. Domestic violence incidents, a positive drug test, non-compliance with facility staff, described in board documents as defiant, argumentative, and mocking toward the people responsible for her supervision. In January 2025, she was arrested for breaching her parole conditions. In June 2025, the Parole Board of Canada formally revoked her day parole. Concluding she presented an undue risk to society, she appealed. On the 5th of March 2026, the Appeal Division upheld the revocation. Carrie Sim, formerly Kelly Ellard, is back in custody. Reena Virk's mother, Suman, who had spent years advocating for her daughter and campaigning against bullying alongside her husband, died in 2018 in what the family described as a tragic accident. She never saw the case fully resolved. Reena's father, Manjit, continues to carry it. In 2024, a Hulu miniseries titled Under the Bridge, starring Lily Gladstone, brought the case to a new generation, a story that Reena's killer reportedly described as disrespectful and that Reena's family has had to relive every time it resurfaces. Reena Virk was 14 years old. She got up after the first attack and walked away. She almost made it. The next case hits differently because the victim also opened the door to someone he knew. Except this time, the person at the door wasn't the danger. The danger was already hiding around the corner, waiting for her to bring him out. The two mothers knew each other well. They were close friends. Their boys had grown up together, played basketball together through elementary school, through middle school, bound by the kind of friendship that forms early and feels permanent. On the day the verdict came in, both mothers were in the courtroom. One of them had lost her son, the other had lost hers too, just in a different way. Edgar Utley V was 15 years old, a freshman at Hillsborough High School in Nashville, Tennessee, known to the people who loved him for his energy, his athleticism, and a talent his family said was unique. On the morning of the 4th of February 2021, he was at his father's home on Pointer Court in the Antioch area of South Nashville. It was an ordinary Thursday. Around noon, a girl came to the door. Someone EJ knew, someone he let in without hesitation. Her name was Tramisha Farris. She was 15 years old, and she was the girlfriend of EJ's childhood friend, Wilton Alexander. Farris spent approximately 10 minutes inside the house with EJ. Then she led him out onto the front porch. That was the plan. Wilton Alexander was already there, dressed in red, hiding around the corner of the building. Surveillance footage from the scene captured it all. Farris in white, standing at the front door, positioning EJ exactly where he needed to be. Alexander emerging from the corner. The shot happened. Emergency personnel arrived minutes later and rushed EJ to Vanderbilt University Medical Center. He died a short time later. When Alexander and Farris fled back to the car that had dropped them off, driven by two teenage witnesses who had no idea what they had just been part of, Alexander was carrying two guns. He had left his white shoes behind at the scene. Police identified the motive as robbery. Wilton Alexander and EJ Utley had been close friends. They had been in each other's lives for years. Their mothers had been in each other's lives for years. Whatever Alexander believed he stood to gain from EJ's death, he had used that closeness, that trust, that open front door, as the instrument of it. And he had sent his girlfriend in first to make sure EJ didn't see it coming. Both were named as suspects the following day. Farris surrendered to juvenile detention on the 6th of February. Alexander surrendered the morning of the 7th. Both were subsequently charged as adults. The trial took place in January 2024 in Davidson County Criminal Court before Judge Steve Dozier. It lasted a full week. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Jenny Charles, alongside ADS Chantley Frazier and Wesley King, with Victim Witness Coordinator Kathy Harrison. District Attorney Glenn R. Funk oversaw the case. The surveillance footage was central. The camera had caught the moment of the shooting with unambiguous clarity. During the trial, Detective Chad High of the Metro Police Department testified that exhibits introduced late by the defense were potentially doctored and unreliable, a development that further damaged the credibility of the defense's case. On the 25th of January 2024, the jury convicted both Wilton Alexander and Tramisha Farris of first-degree felony murder. Judge Steve Dozier sentenced both to life in prison. Farris appealed. Her legal team argued before the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals that the evidence was legally insufficient to prove a robbery had occurred, and that even if it had, the state had failed to prove she participated in it. In 2025, the Court of Criminal Appeals rejected both arguments and affirmed her conviction and sentence. She remains incarcerated in the Tennessee Department of Corrections. The victim in the next case also trusted the people around her completely. She climbed out of her window in the middle of the night to go for a drive with her two best friends. What she didn't know was that they had already decided she wasn't coming back. For 6 months, one of the people who killed Skylar Neese called Skylar's father every single day. She asked for updates. She helped put up missing person flyers. She sat with the family, comforted them, and posted tributes online. Dave Neese later said she was so present after his daughter disappeared that she had become like a second child in their home. Her name was Sheila Eddy. She was 16 years old, and she knew exactly where Skylar was. Skylar Annette Neese was born on the 10th of February 1996 in Star City, West Virginia. She was an honors student with a part-time job at Wendy's and ambitions of going to law school. She and Sheila Eddy had been inseparable since elementary school. When Rachel Elizabeth Schoaf transferred to their high school, she joined their tight circle, and the three became a trio, always together, always driving around late at night, always in each other's orbit. On the evening of the 5th of July, 2012, Skylar came home from her work shift, greeted her parents, petted the dog, said goodnight. Her father later recalled she looked at him and said, "I love you, Daddy." Those were the last words he ever heard from her. After midnight, Skylar pushed a bench under her bedroom window, climbed out, and slipped into the back seat of Sheila Eddy's Toyota Camry. She thought they were going for a late drive to smoke marijuana, something the three of them had done before. She had no idea that in the boot of the car, Eddy and Schoaf had packed kitchen knives, a shovel, cleaning products, and fresh clothes. They drove her across the state border into a remote wooded area in Wayne Township, Greene County, Pennsylvania. When Skylar walked toward the car to retrieve a lighter, Schoaf and Eddy counted to 3 out loud and attacked. They stabbed her approximately 50 times. Skylar tried to run. The assault continued. They covered her body with branches, abandoned their attempt to bury her when the ground proved too rocky, and drove back to Morgantown. And then they went home, and the next morning they began helping search for her. For 6 months, Eddy and Schoaf lied fluently, to police, to Skylar's parents, to their classmates, to anyone who asked. They said they had dropped Skylar off near her apartment. Phone records and a cell tower ping that placed all three of them in rural Pennsylvania at 4 in the morning told a different story. Investigators began to notice inconsistencies. Surveillance footage contradicted the girl's timeline. Blood was eventually found in Eddy's car and confirmed through DNA as Skylar's. In December 2012, the weight of it finally broke Rachel Schoaf. She suffered a nervous breakdown severe enough for her mother to call emergency services. After 5 days in a psychiatric hospital, she was released and immediately asked to be taken to her lawyer's office. She confessed everything. She led investigators to Skylar's body, which was found on the 16th of January 2013 in the Pennsylvania woods, less than 30 miles from Skylar's home. She had been there since July. When investigators asked Schoaf why they had done it, her answer stunned the room. "We just didn't like her. It would take 11 more years for the full truth to surface." At Schoaf's 2023 parole hearing, she revealed that she and Eddy had been in a secret romantic relationship, and that they were terrified Skylar was going to expose it. Dave Neese said hearing that for the first time, after 11 years of not knowing why his daughter was murdered, was one of the most painful moments of his life. Schoaf pleaded guilty to second-degree murder on the 1st of May 2013 and was sentenced on the 26th of February 2014 to 30 years in prison, with parole eligibility after 10 years. Eddy pleaded guilty to first-degree murder on the 24th of January 2014 and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Both were tried as adults. Both are currently housed at Lakin Correctional Center in West Columbia, West Virginia. Schoaf's parole was denied in May 2023 and again in July 2024. The board citing, among other concerns, a poor post-release home plan and a prison write-up as additional grounds for the denial. She waived her subsequent hearing and is next eligible in June 2026. Eddy is first eligible for parole review in 2028. In March 2026, Dave Neese revealed in interviews a detail that had only recently come to light, that Sheila Eddy's mother had found a necklace belonging to Skylar in her daughter's room years after the murder and had mailed it to the Neese family. Eddy had kept it, a token from the scene, held onto in silence for years. Skylar's parents, Dave and Mary Neese, have channeled their grief into a program called Skylar Talks, visiting schools and prisons to speak about how violence ripples far beyond its immediate victims. That same month, Hulu released a 3-part docuseries, Friends Like These, The Murder of Skylar Neese, revisiting the case and featuring new interviews. The two killers in the next case didn't hide anything. They filmed it. They laughed through it. And then they posted it online for the world to see. There is a video, 30 seconds long, shot from the passenger seat of a stolen car moving through the northwest streets of Las Vegas at speed. In it, a voice asks, "Ready?" There is giggling in response. Then the car swerves deliberately into a bike lane. A man in a red shirt on a bicycle disappears beneath the vehicle. The car drives on. The giggling continues. The person behind the camera posted it to Instagram. Andreas Probst was 64 years old, a retired police chief from Bell, California, who had dedicated decades of his life to public service. On the morning of the 14th of August 2023, he was doing what he did most mornings, cycling near Centennial Parkway in Las Vegas, Nevada. He had no connection to the two teenagers in that car. He was simply a man on a bicycle in a red shirt who happened to be in the wrong bike lane at the wrong moment. Jesus Ayala was 17 years old and a documented member of the Nightcrawlers gang. Jamir Keys was 16. That morning, they had stolen a Hyundai Elantra using what investigators described as the TikTok method, exploiting a widely circulated social media trend that showed how to bypass the ignition of certain vehicles using basic tools and a USB drive. But the Elantra was not the only car they stole that day. By the time they reached Probst, they had already stolen 4 vehicles, struck at least one other cyclist, a man in his 70s who survived, and hit another driver. Judge Jacqueline Bluth would later describe it from the bench. It just kept going and escalating, and more people kept getting hurt. When the video began circulating on social media in late August 2023, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department launched an immediate investigation. The footage left no ambiguity. Ayala was the driver. Keys was the one filming and laughing. Neither appeared to understand nor care what they had just done. Investigators identified them, built the case, and brought charges. What began as a hit-and-run became a murder investigation. Both pleaded guilty in October 2025. Ayala and Keys each to second-degree murder with use of a deadly weapon, along with battery charges. On the 16th of December 2025, they appeared before Judge Bluth in Clark County District Court for sentencing. Neither of them said a word when allowed to address the court. Crystal Probst, Andy's widow, did not have that option of silence. She told the court, "They made a choice, and that choice destroyed my family. Andy was stolen from me in an act so cruel, so deliberate, that it not only shattered my heart, but the heart of everybody who loved him." Andy's daughter, Taylor Probst, told the court her father would never walk her down the aisle. His son, Michael, stood beside her as she spoke. Clark County District Attorney Steve Wolfson and Chief Deputy District Attorney John Giordani prosecuted the case. Giordani called it one of the most callous and egregious acts he had seen in his career. Judge Bluth sentenced Ayala, the driver, to 20 years to life in prison, plus an additional 2 to 10 years for battery. Keys, the passenger who filmed it, received 18 years to life. Both sentences were the maximum possible under Nevada law, given that they were juveniles at the time of the crime. Under Nevada statute, both must be eligible for parole after 20 years. The Probst family has also filed a civil wrongful death lawsuit against both Ayala and Keys, as well as against Hyundai, alleging that a manufacturing vulnerability in the vehicle made it dangerously easy to steal. Andy Probst was a retired police chief. He spent his career protecting people from exactly the kind of violence that ended his life. He was on his bicycle on a Tuesday morning in August, wearing a red shirt. The boy in the passenger seat posted the video to Instagram 2 weeks later, as though it was something worth sharing. As we wind down this video, the victim in the next case wasn't a stranger at all. He was a friend. He got into the car willingly, went to a place he thought was safe, with people he trusted completely, and nobody found what was left of him for 3 months. On the 21st of September 2024, a man went target shooting along the rim of the Snake River Canyon in Gooding County, Idaho. He spotted something on the ground, reached down, and picked it up, thinking it was a rock. It wasn't a rock. It was a human skull. A few feet away, investigators found a shallow grave. Inside it was what remained of Dax Richens, an 18-year-old from Jerome, Idaho, who had been missing since June. He had been beaten, stabbed, dismembered, and buried there by 2 people he called his friends. Alexander Garcia was 17 years old. Roland Delacruz was 15. According to Gooding County Sheriff Sean Guff, all 3 had been friends. In June 2024, Garcia and De La Cruz lured Richens to a remote area of Gooding County under the pretense of hanging out, a bonfire, a night with friends. Once they had him in that remote location, they attacked him. They beat him. They stabbed him. They left his wallet containing his driver's license at the scene. They came back the following day and continued dismembering the body. Garcia took a leg bone and kept it in his truck as a trophy. They made posts on social media. On Snapchat, Garcia had already told someone he needed to, in his own words, physically deform a human skull. After the killing, he messaged a friend, "I killed someone." Investigators executed between 60 and 70 search warrants across homes, phones, and social media accounts to build the case. Gooding County prosecuting attorney Trevor Missildine noted that De La Cruz told investigators he was motivated by a belief that Richens had raped a female friend. Garcia, prosecutors said, was simply all in and had expressed a desire to kill again. Both pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. Garcia was sentenced on the 8th of October 2025 to 25 years to life in prison. De La Cruz appeared before 5th District Judge Rosemary Emery on the 20th of October 2025, where he addressed the court before sentencing. "Every night, I relive that night where Alexander and I killed Dax. Every night, I'm not able to go to sleep. I know what I did was wrong, and not only wrong, but a little psychotic. I know you're thinking, good, let him suffer. I agree with you. Let me suffer." Judge Emery sentenced him to 23 years to life, bypassing juvenile detention and sending him directly to the Idaho Department of Corrections. Rodney Richens, Dax's father, sat in that courtroom and said, "I can't imagine what Dax was thinking when his friends turned on him, attacked him, and stabbed him to death." A third suspect, Nathaniel Felix, age 23, faces charges of accessory to murder and destruction of evidence for allegedly helping to mutilate and bury Dax Richens' body. His jury trial was scheduled to begin on the 3rd of February 2026. As of April 2026, the outcome of that trial has not been confirmed in publicly available records. Dax Richens was 18 years old. He went to meet his friends. A stranger found his skull on a canyon rim 3 months later, thinking it was a rock. That is how this ends. Thanks for watching. And if you are new here, please hit the like button and subscribe, because every week we bring you cases researched to the fullest extent, told with the weight they deserve.